The alarms on Xandar did not just ring. They screamed. It was not a warning of a raid. It was a warning of planetary death. The sky above the capital city tore open. It looked like a wound in the skin of the universe. Reality bled. A fleet of ships emerged from the rift. These were not the sleek starships of the Nova Corps. They were ugly. They were massive. They looked like flying cathedrals built from old iron and misery. They were covered in guns. The lead ship was 20 kilometers long. It pushed the clouds away just by existing. The shadow it cast covered the entire Western Hemisphere. The sun was gone. The Nova Corps launched their star blasters. The golden ships formed a defensive net. They were fast and agile. They locked onto the intruders. But the intruders did not care about agility. The massive iron ships fired their macro cannons. These guns did not fire lasers. They fired solid slugs the size of train cars. The physics of this galaxy had never seen such brute force. The slugs smashed through the star blasters. They did not just destroy the ships. They turned them into dust. The impact velocity was impossible to stop. On the ground, Roman Day watched his world die. He stood in the wreckage of a plaza. The air smelled of ozone and burning meat. Drop pods slammed into the pavement. The concrete shattered. The doors of the pods blew open with explosive bolts. Warriors stepped out. They were not Kree. They were not Skrulls. They were human, but they were wrong. They were 8 feet tall. They wore thick plates of ceramic armor. Their guns fired explosive rockets that tore people apart. These warriors did not run. They advanced in a line. They checked corners. They covered each other. They killed anything that moved. A Nova soldier tried to surrender. He dropped his weapon. The giant warrior in front of him did not pause. He raised his bolt gun and fired. The Nova soldier exploded. To these invaders, surrender was not an option for those who harbored aliens. Xandar was a cosmopolitan world. Humans lived with Xandarians. To the invaders, this was a sin. It was heresy. A broadcast took over every screen on the planet. It was low-tech and grainy. It showed a symbol of a double-headed eagle. A voice spoke in a harsh, ancient language, but the universal translators struggled to translate it. It finally rendered the message. It was a declaration of compliance. The planet was classified as a lost human colony that had been corrupted by Xenos influence. The punishment was purgation. The population was to be processed. The alien elements were to be exterminated. Then the golden light appeared. It manifested in the high-security vault of the Nova Corps. The door to the vault was made to withstand a supernova. It melted in seconds. A figure walked through the molten metal. He was a giant among giants. He wore gold armor that blinded the eyes. A psychic weight filled the room. Everyone within a mile felt the urge to weep. They felt a sudden, crushing sense of shame. They felt like children standing before an angry father. This was the Emperor. He did not look like a villain from a comic book. He looked like history itself. He looked at the purple power stone floating in the containment field. He did not smile. He did not make a speech about balance. He looked at the stone as a tool. It was a dangerous tool, but a necessary one. He reached out with a hand clad in a lightning claw. He crushed the containment field. He took the stone. The energy surged up his arm. The purple fire tried to consume him. He clamped his will down upon it. The stone dimmed. It submitted to him. He turned to his custodian guard. He gave a simple order. He told them to burn the archives. He told them to secure the genetic stock of the human population. He told them to kill everyone else. The fleet in orbit began the second stage of bombardment. Continents cracked. The oceans began to boil. The Emperor walked back to the teleportation flare. He had the first piece of the puzzle. He had seen the threat of the warp in this universe. He knew he needed total control to stop it. Xandar was just the first casualty. The Crusade had come to a new galaxy, and it brought only war. The refugee ship, known as the Statesman, drifted through the void. It carried the last survivors of Asgard. Thor stood on the bridge. He looked tired. He had lost his eye and his hammer. He thought the worst was over. He was wrong. The sensors on the ship began to fail. They did not detect a weapon. They detected a mass so large it distorted the gravity around them. The stars in front of them disappeared. A shadow swallowed the view. It was a fleet of ships. These ships were not sleek or beautiful. They were built like fortresses. They were covered in Gothic arches and gargoyles. They burned dirty fuel that left trails of thick radioactive smoke in the vacuum. Heimdall gripped his sword. He had seen many things in the Nine Realms. He had never seen this. The lead ship was gold. It was the size of a continent. It radiated a psychic pressure that made Thor's knees shake. It felt like 1,000 screaming voices in his head. The radio on the Asgardian ship crackled. There was no request for identification. There was no demand for surrender. A teleportation beam cut through the shields of the Statesman. It was not the clean light of the Bifrost. It was a violent tear in reality. Gold-armored giants appeared on the bridge. They were the Custodes. They moved with a speed that defied their size. The Asgardian guards charged. They were strong warriors. They were gods to some. But the Custodes were built by the master of mankind. An Asgardian swung a sword. The custodian caught the blade with one hand. He snapped the metal. He drove his spear through the Asgardian's chest. The motion was efficient. It was emotionless. It was like a machine crushing a rock. Loki stepped forward. He tried to speak. He tried to use his silver tongue. He offered them a deal. The leader of the Custodes did not listen. He backhanded Loki. The blow sent the god of mischief crashing into the wall. The impact cracked the hull. These invaders did not care about words. They did not care about titles. They secured the room. They formed a perimeter. Then the air grew heavy. Frost formed on the deck plates. The Emperor of Mankind teleported onto the bridge. He was larger than the Custodes. His armor was a work of art and a weapon of mass destruction. He held a sword that burned with fire. He looked at Thor. He did not see a king. He saw a mutant. He saw a creature pretending to be a god. The imperial truth forbade the worship of gods. To the Emperor, Thor was a violation of logic. He was a dangerous variable. The Emperor raised his hand. Psychic energy lashed out. It pinned Thor to the floor. Thor tried to summon lightning. The lightning fizzled out. The Emperor's will was stronger than the storm. Ebony Maw and the Black Order of Thanos were also on the ship, hiding in the shadows, waiting to strike. They watched in horror. They had never seen power like this. The Emperor sensed them. He did not look at them. He simply flexed his mind. The shadows burned away. The children of Thanos fell to the ground, their minds shattered by the psychic weight. The Emperor walked to the vault where the Tesseract was kept. He could feel the space stone inside. It called to him. It was a key to the webway. It was a way to travel without the warp. He crushed the cube. He took the blue stone. He placed it on his gauntlet next to the purple power stone. He turned to his guards. He ordered the ship to be purged. The Asgardians were Xenos sympathizers and mutants. They were to be eliminated. The Emperor teleported away. The Custodes began their work. They moved room to room. They used bolters that fired explosive rockets. The sound was deafening. It was a rhythm of slaughter. Thor watched his people die. He screamed. He fought against the psychic weight. But he was helpless. The Statesman exploded a few minutes later. It was not a battle. It was pest control. The debris of the Asgardian ship floated in space. The Imperial fleet did not stop. It turned its massive prows toward the coordinates of terror. The navigators in the spires of the ships opened their third eyes. They saw the beacon of Earth. They called it Holy Terror, but it felt wrong. It felt quiet. The Astronomicon was missing. They were confused, but they followed their orders. The fleet entered the warp. They tore through the dimension of chaos to reach the Sol system. On Earth, Tony Stark was in a park with Pepper Potts. He was talking about a dream. He was talking about a child. Then his watch beeped. It was not a normal alarm. It was a planetary proximity warning. Friday, his AI spoke with panic in her voice. Massive gravitational displacement was occurring near Pluto. It was fast, too fast. Before Tony could ask for a visual, the sky over New York changed. It did not turn dark from clouds. It turned dark because something blocked the sun. The Imperial fleet had exited the warp directly in high orbit. This was a reckless maneuver. It caused tidal waves in the Pacific Ocean. It caused earthquakes in Japan. The sheer mass of the ships disturbed the orbit of satellites. The internet crashed worldwide. GPS systems failed. Cars stopped on highways because their navigation computers could not find a signal. Panic was instant. People looked up and saw the bottoms of city-sized cathedrals floating in the void. Nick Fury sat in his car. He watched the data streams die one by one. He grabbed his pager. He looked at the symbol of Captain Marvel. He hesitated. This did not look like an invasion she could punch. This looked like the end of days. He sent the signal. Then a voice took over every radio frequency on Earth. It was broadcasting from the flagship, the Bucephalus. The language was High Gothic. It sounded like Latin mixed with thunder. Most people could not understand it, but the intent was clear. It was a demand for obedience. Inside the flagship, the High Lords of Terror gathered. They looked at the readouts of Earth. They were confused. The geography was correct. The continents were in the right place. But the cities were wrong. The population was too small. There were no hives. There was no golden throne. And there was something else. Their scanners picked up massive amounts of abominable intelligence. They saw the internet. They saw robots. They saw AI running the banking systems. To the Mechanicus priests, Earth was a hellscape of tech heresy. Fabricator General Mars, 88, let out a screech of binary noise. He pointed a metal finger at the screen showing New York City. He demanded the planet be cleansed. He wanted to strip the data cores and burn the rest. But a custodian raised a hand. The Emperor had spoken. This was the cradle of humanity. The people were to be brought into compliance. The mutants were to be culled. The witches were to be sanctioned. The false technology was to be destroyed. But the planet would stand. In the Sanctum Sanctorum, Doctor Strange stood by the window. Wong was beside him. They felt the disturbance in the magical barriers. This was not a magical threat. It was a physical one, but it carried a spiritual void. Strange looked at the time stone in the eye of Agamotto. He saw 1 billion futures. In almost all of them, Earth burned. He saw a golden figure sitting on a throne of skulls. He saw a future where humanity conquered the stars but lost its soul. He closed the eye. He knew what was coming. Tony Stark arrived at the sanctum. Bruce Banner crashed through the stairs a moment later. He had been sent by Heimdall before the statesman died. Banner was shaking. He tried to warn them about Thanos, but then he looked outside. He saw the ships. He realized Thanos was not the problem anymore. Something worse had arrived. The wind picked up. Dust swirled in the street. A circle of blue light did not form. Instead, a pod slammed into the street. The drop pod hit the pavement at terminal velocity. It created a crater 10 feet deep. Cars were flipped over, windows shattered for blocks. The doors of the pod hissed. Steam vented out. Explosive bolts fired. The ramp slammed down. 5 warriors walked out. They were painted in the yellow armor of the Imperial Fists. They were Space Marines. They were 7 feet tall. They carried bolt rifles that were as big as a normal man's torso. Iron Man flew down to meet them. He opened his faceplate. He tried to be diplomatic. He asked them if they were tourists. The sergeant of the squad looked at him. The sergeant's helmet had a skull on the forehead. The lenses glowed red. The sergeant did not see a hero. He saw a man fused with a machine. He saw tech heresy. He saw a violation of the sacred human form. The sergeant spoke one word. He said purge. The Space Marines raised their bolters. They fired. The sound was like a jackhammer. The rocket-propelled grenades flew at supersonic speeds. Tony closed his helmet just in time. The rounds hit his nanotech shield. The shield flared and shattered. The kinetic energy threw Tony backward through a building. These were not laser blasts. These were armor-piercing explosives. Dr. Strange summoned his Tau Mandalas. He cast a spell to bind the Marines. Crimson bands of energy wrapped around the sergeant. The sergeant did not panic. He had fought Eldar warlocks. He knew how to fight magic. He revved his chainsword. The teeth of the sword were made of adamantium. They spun with a screaming motor. He slashed at the magical bands. The sword tore through the energy. The sergeant charged. He moved faster than a man that size should move. He backhanded Strange. The sorcerer flew into a car. Bruce Banner tried to turn into the Hulk. He strained. He turned green. The Hulk roared. He charged the squad. A Space Marine with a heavy bolter braced himself. He unleashed a stream of shells into the Hulk. The Hulk's skin was tough. The shells exploded against his chest. It hurt. The Hulk roared in anger. He grabbed the Marine and threw him. The Marine hit a wall, cracked the brick, and stood back up. The Marine did not stop. He drew a combat knife the size of a sword. He stabbed the Hulk in the shoulder. The Hulk looked confused. He had never fought something that didn't break when he hit it. Spider-Man swung in. He saw the chaos. He tried to web up the Marines. The webbing hit their armor. The Marines ignored it. They ripped the webs off with their immense strength. One Marine tracked Spider-Man's movement. He calculated the arc of the swing. He fired a single shot. The bolt round clipped the web line. Peter Parker fell. He landed on a fire escape. He looked at the invaders. He was terrified. They didn't talk. They didn't banter. They just killed. In orbit, the bureaucracy of the Imperium began to grind. The Departamento Munitorum started cataloguing the resources of Earth. They noted the agricultural output. It was inefficient. They noted the water supplies. They began drafting plans to ration the water. They did not care about the local governments. The UN was irrelevant. The logistics of the fleet required supplies. Transport ships began to descend, not to attack, but to harvest. They landed in the Midwest of America. They landed in the wheat fields of Ukraine. They landed in the rice paddies of China. Giant harvesters rolled out of the ships. They began to strip the fields. Farmers who tried to stop them were ignored or shot. The Imperium needed to feed millions of crewmen. Earth was now a supply depot. This was the first true horror for the people. It wasn't the fighting in New York. It was the sudden realization that their food was being stolen. The grocery stores emptied in hours. The supply chain collapsed. Back in New York, the battle escalated. War Machine arrived. Rhodes unleashed his full arsenal. Missiles and bullets rained down on the Imperial fists. The Marines took cover. They used tactical squad movement. They flanked Rhodes. One Marine threw a crack grenade. It magnetized to War Machine's armor. Rhodes saw the blinking light. He dived. The explosion tore off his leg stabilizers. He crashed. Vision flew down. He phased through the ground and came up behind the sergeant. He tried to reason with them. The sergeant turned. He saw the synthesoid. He saw the mind stone in his forehead. The sergeant's rage peaked. To him, Vision was an abominable intelligence, a soulless machine mimicking a man. This was the ultimate heresy. The sergeant activated his comms. He called for heavy support. From the clouds, a Storm Raven gunship descended. It screamed like a banshee. It opened fire with assault cannons. The street disintegrated. Vision increased his density to become diamond hard. The bullets sparked off him. But the sheer volume of fire pinned him down. The Imperium did not fight fair. They fought with overwhelming superiority. Then the psychic pressure returned. It washed over New York. Every window in the city shattered. People fell to their knees, nosebleeds starting spontaneously. The fighting stopped. The Space Marines knelt. They lowered their heads. A golden light appeared in the center of the street. It was not a portal. It was a tear in the fabric of the world. The Emperor stepped out. He was 20 feet tall in the eyes of the mortals, though his physical form was shifting. He appeared as a golden giant to the Avengers. To the civilians, he looked like a savior. To the pious, he looked like God. To Tony Stark, he looked like a tyrant. The Emperor looked at Vision. He wanted the stone. He did not ask. He reached out with his mind. Vision screamed. It was a digital scream. The Mind Stone was being pulled from his head. Wanda Maximoff felt his pain. She ran out of the building. Her hands glowed with red chaos magic. She screamed and threw a wave of energy at the Emperor. The Emperor looked at her. He saw the mark of the warp on her. He saw the potential for chaos. He did not block her attack. He absorbed it. The red energy hit his golden aura and vanished. He looked at her with disappointment. He spoke for the first time. His voice was not loud, but it was heard by everyone in the city. He said that witchcraft was a sickness. He said he was the cure. He raised his sword. Fire erupted from the blade. He swung it in a horizontal arc. The flame was not normal fire. It was psychic fire. It burned the soul. Wanda put up a shield. The fire shattered it. She was thrown back, unconscious. Her spirit nearly burned out. The Emperor turned back to Vision. The machine lay on the ground, twitching. The Emperor stepped on Vision's chest. The vibranium creaked. The Emperor ripped the Mind Stone from Vision's head. Vision went grey. He died instantly. The Emperor held the yellow stone. He looked at it. He felt the intelligence inside it. He felt the presence of the Jarvis code and the Ultron code. He disgusted it. He purged the code with a thought, leaving only the raw power of the stone. He placed it on his gauntlet. 3 stones. The Avengers were broken. Iron Man was out of power. Thor was missing. Cap was helping civilians escape the rubble. The Hulk was confused and bleeding. The Emperor did not finish them off. They were beneath his notice. He had what he came for. He turned to the sergeant of the Imperial Fists. He gave an order. He told them to secure the Time Stone. He pointed to the Sanctum Sanctorum. Doctor Strange stood in the doorway. He held the Eye of Agamotto closed. He knew he could not win a fight. He could use the Time Stone to loop time, but the Emperor was a creature of the warp. The warp exists outside of time. Strange feared that if he used the stone, the Emperor might be able to follow him into the time loop. The risk was too great. Strange did the only strategic thing left. He retreated. He opened a portal to the mirror dimension and pulled Spider-Man and Stark inside with him. They vanished. The Emperor watched them go. He did not chase. He knew they had nowhere to run. The galaxy belonged to him. He ordered the construction of a fortress on the site of the battle. He declared New York to be the new planetary capital, designated as Hive Secundus. He ordered the population to be conscripted for labor. The invasion was over. The occupation had begun. The sun set over a broken city. Smoke rose in pillars. The silhouette of the Imperial fleet blocked the stars. On the streets, the Space Marines began to patrol. They set up checkpoints. They scanned people for genetic purity. Anyone with a mutation was pulled from the line and shot. It was cold. It was efficient. It was the Pax Imperialis. In the shadows of a destroyed alley, Nick Fury watched. He held the pager. Captain Marvel had not answered yet. He realized she might be dead. He realized they were all alone. He looked at the sky and felt a true, deep despair. This wasn't a villain trying to destroy the world. This was a ruler who believed he owned it, and his armies were endless. The first day of the Imperial era had ended. The cost was absolute. Far away, in the dark between stars, Thanos watched the data feed. He saw the golden figure take the stones. He saw the brutality. For the first time in his life, the mad Titan felt a chill. He was a fanatic, yes, but he wanted to save the universe by halving it. This new player, this Golden King, he didn't want to save the universe. He wanted to dominate it. Thanos stood up. He put on his helmet. He looked at his gauntlet. It was empty. He knew he had to move fast. He had to get the Soul Stone and the Reality Stone before the Golden King found them. The great game had changed. It was no longer a quest for balance. It was a war for survival. On the bridge of the Bucephalus, the Emperor sat on a command throne. He looked at the tactical map of the galaxy. He saw the location of the Reality Stone. It was in the collection of the Collector on Nowhere. He saw the Soul Stone on Vormir. He made a calculation. He would split his forces. The Primarchs were not with him. They were lost in time or dead in his own timeline. He was alone. But he had his Custodes. He had the Astra Militarum. He had the might of the Mechanicus. He ordered the fleet to prepare for warp translation. Half would stay to pacify Terra. The other half would burn the galaxy to find the stones. The crusade continues. The occupation of Earth was not a swift change. It was a slow suffocation. In the weeks following the arrival, the sky turned a permanent grey. The massive ships in orbit vented promethium waste into the atmosphere. The sun was a dim memory. In the ruins of New York, now called Hive Secundus, the silence was heavy. The noise of traffic and horns was gone. It was replaced by the stomping of armored boots and the grinding of tank treads. The construction of the Imperial Palace had begun in Manhattan. It was not built by paid workers. It was built by the population. Steve Rogers watched from the shadows of a sewer tunnel in Brooklyn. He was dirty. His uniform was torn. He held a can of rations that tasted like chalk. He was not Captain America anymore. He was an insurgent. Beside him, Natasha Romanoff cleaned a stolen bolt pistol. The weapon was too big for her hands, but it was the only thing that could scratch the armor of the invaders. They were tired. They had tried to fight a patrol yesterday. It went wrong. Sam Wilson had tried to fly. A sniper with a laser eye shot his wings off from a mile away. Sam was gone. They didn't even recover the body. The Imperium recycled the dead into starch corpse rations. Steve tried not to think about that. The new government was absolute. The Departamento Munitorum had seized all food production. If you wanted to eat, you worked. If you refused to work, you were a rebel. If you were a rebel, you were turned into a servitor. Steve had seen it. He saw a man he knew, a baker from Queens, walking down the street. But half the man's head was replaced with metal. His arm was a pneumatic drill. He had no eyes, only sensors. He didn't speak. He just worked. This was the fate of those who resisted the Emperor's peace. It was worse than death. It was the erasure of the soul. Across the ocean, the nation of Wakanda closed its borders tight. King T'Challa stood in his control room. The holographic screens showed the world going dark. He saw the supply lines of the Imperium spreading like a virus. He saw the harvesting machines stripping the Amazon rainforest for wood and fuel. Okoye stood beside him. She was angry. She wanted to fight. But T'Challa was a strategist. He knew their energy shield could stop lasers and missiles, but he had seen the footage from New York. These invaders used gravity weapons. They used psychic fire. Then the alarm screamed. A probe had entered Wakandan airspace. It was not a stealth drone. It was a skull with mechanical wings. It was a servo skull. It flew over the Golden City. The Wakandan defenses shot it down, but it was too late. The probe had transmitted a signal. It had detected the vibranium. To the Mechanicus priests in orbit, vibranium was a holy metal. They believed it was a gift from the machine god, wrongly held by savages. They did not send a diplomat. They sent the Legio Cybernetica. In deep space, the Guardians of the Galaxy arrived at nowhere. The mining colony was built inside the severed head of a celestial being. It was a place of scum and villainy. Peter Quill flew the Benatar towards the dock. Thor sat in the back. The god of thunder was silent. He had fashioned a new eye from a spare robotic part, but his spirit was broken. He kept muttering about the golden giant. Rocket Raccoon was nervous. He checked his guns over and over. He smelled something in the air. It wasn't the usual smell of mining fumes. It smelled like incense and old blood. They walked through the streets of nowhere. The mood was tense. Aliens were packing their bags. They had heard the rumors. A Great Crusade was coming. A fleet that ate worlds. Gamora led them to the Collector's Museum. She needed to get the Reality Stone before Thanos did. She pushed open the heavy doors. The collection was in chaos. Tyvan the Collector was frantically packing artifacts into crates. He looked terrified. He showed them the ether. The red sludge floated in a containment unit. Tyvan offered to give it to them for free. He just wanted a ride out of the sector. Before Quill could answer, the wall exploded. Thanos had arrived, but he was not alone. He had the Black Order with him. Cull Obsidian smashed through a display case. Proxima Midnight leaped onto a railing. Thanos walked in. He looked weary. He didn't have his usual arrogance. He knew he was in a race. He demanded the stone. Drax pulled his knives. He screamed and charged Thanos. Thanos caught Drax by the throat and slammed him into the floor. It was fast. It was brutal. Gamora drew her sword. She engaged Thanos. Father and daughter fought. Sparks flew. But then, the gravity in the room shifted. The lights flickered and died. A deep, resonant horn blasted. It shook the bones of everyone in the room. It was the war horn of an Imperial battleship. The ceiling of nowhere was thick bone and metal. It didn't matter. A lance strike from orbit pierced it. A beam of pure energy the width of a highway punched a hole through the celestial head. Atmosphere vented out. The vacuum rushed in. Then, the boarding torpedoes hit. They slammed into the museum floor like meteors. The doors blew open. The custodian guard emerged. These were the Emperor's personal companions. They were gold, tall, and faster than the eye could follow. They did not shout. They did not monologue. They saw Thanos. They saw the stone. They attacked. Custodian with a guardian spear lunged at Thanos. The Mad Titan raised his arm to block. The spear tip was powered by a disruption field. It cut through Thanos' armor and sliced into his purple skin. Thanos roared in pain. He punched the custodian, sending the golden warrior sliding back. But the custodian did not fall. He spun his spear and came back. The guardians were caught in the middle. Star-Lord put on his mask. He flew up using his jet boots. He fired his element guns at the Custodes. The energy blasts hit the golden auramite armor and did nothing. It was like throwing pebbles at a tank. A custodian looked up, calculated the trajectory, and threw a knife. The knife pierced Star-Lord's jet boot. Quill spun out of control and crashed into a pile of alien artifacts. Rocket and Groot opened fire. Rocket used a gravity mine. It stuck to a custodian's chest. The mine activated. It should have crushed the target. The custodian simply ripped the armor plate off his chest and threw it away before the mine imploded. Rocket's jaw dropped. He had never seen anything that tough. These guys weren't biological. They were alchemy and genecraft made manifest. Thanos realized he was losing. He had strength, but these warriors had skill and numbers, and they had no honor. They fought to kill. Cull Obsidian tried to help his father. A squad of Sisters of Silence moved in. These women had no souls. They were blanks. Their presence nullified psychic energy and caused physical sickness in those around them. Cull Obsidian felt his strength drain away. He vomited. A sister swung her greatsword and took his head off. The Black Order was being dismantled. Then the Emperor projected his mind into the room. He was not physically there, but his psychic avatar formed from golden light. The pressure was immense. The glass cases in the museum shattered. Tivan the Collector fell to his knees, bleeding from his eyes. The avatar of the Emperor looked at the Reality Stone. He reached out a ghostly hand. The containment unit cracked. The red liquid floated towards him. Thanos lunged for it. He was desperate. He touched the red liquid. The Reality Stone reacted to his desire. He tried to turn the Custodes into bubbles. He tried to warp the room, but the Emperor's will was a fortress. The Emperor pushed back with his mind. The warp clashed with the Infinity Stone. Reality fractured. The room became a kaleidoscope of mirrors. For a second, they were in a field of wheat. Then they were in a volcano. Then they were back in the museum. The Emperor overpowered the stone. He forced it into a solid state. The ruby gem fell into the hand of the lead custodian. Thanos screamed in rage. He had lost. He opened a portal with his space device, a crude teleporter compared to the stones. He grabbed Gamora. He needed her. She knew where the Soul Stone was. But a bolter shell caught him in the shoulder. He dropped her. He stumbled through the portal alone. The portal closed. Thanos had fled. Gamora lay on the floor. She looked up. The golden giants surrounded her. She reached for her dagger. A spear point touched her throat. The custodian shield captain looked down. His face was like a statue. He did not kill her. The Emperor had foreseen her value. She was a nexus point. She held information. The Custodes grabbed her. They shackled her with heavy adamantium cuffs. She struggled, but it was useless. They dragged her towards the teleportarium beacon. Star-Lord tried to crawl towards her. He shouted her name. A custodian stepped on his back. The weight broke Quill's ribs. The custodian raised his spear to finish the human. Thor threw Stormbreaker. The axe hit the custodian's shield generator. It sparked. The custodian stumbled. Thor grabbed Quill and Rocket. He yelled for Heimdall, hoping the gatekeeper was still watching from the afterlife, or hoping for luck. The Bifrost did not come. Instead, the Guardian's ship, the Benatar, flew through the hole in the roof. Mantis was piloting. She lowered the ramp. Thor threw the others in and jumped. They barely escaped as the museum exploded behind them. The Imperium did not leave nowhere intact. They planted melter charges on the core of the station. As the Imperial fleet pulled away, The charges detonated. The severed celestial head cracked in two. The colony was vaporized. The message was clear. There is no neutral ground. There is only the Imperium. Back on Earth, the catastrophe was beginning in Wakanda. The sun was setting over the savannah. The air was filled with the sound of chanting. The border tribe stood ready. The Kingsguard stood ready. T'Challa had opened the shield to let the few refugees in, but now it was locked. They waited for the dropships. They expected pods. They expected monsters. They did not expect the Titans. From the heavy lifters in the clouds, the Mechanicus deployed a god machine. It was a Warhound Scout Titan. It was 50 feet tall. It had backward-jointed legs like a wolf. It landed with a seismic thud that knocked warriors off their feet. Its void shields shimmered. It raised its weapon arm. A plasma blast gun glowed like a trapped sun. T'Challa screamed for the shield wall to hold. The Warhound fired. The ball of plasma hit the Wakandan energy barrier. The barrier turned purple and groaned. It held. The Wakandans cheered. They fired their sonic spears. The blue energy blast hit the Titan's void shields. The shields flared but did not break. The Titan took a step forward. Then another landed, and another. 3 Warhound Titans. They were the hunting pack. Behind them came the Skitarii. These were the soldiers of the machine god. They were cyborgs. Their legs were metal. Their eyelids were removed to stop them from blinking. They marched in perfect unison, guided by a data tether. They fired galvanic rifles. The bullets were radioactive. When a Wakandan warrior was hit, he didn't just die. His blood boiled. The sonic blankets of the border tribe were useless against solid slugs and radiation. Shuri was in her lab. She was trying to analyze the enemy tech. The readings made no sense. It was ancient, thousands of years old, yet it was more advanced than anything she had seen. It was a paradox. She saw the code they were using. It was binary, but it was like a prayer. It was a virus that attacked the Wakandan network. The internet in the city died. The lights went out. The Mechanicus was blinding them. The Warhounds focused their fire on a single point of the dome. The plasma heated the air to 10,000 degrees. The vibranium emitter overloaded. With a sound like a cracking whip, the dome shattered. The shield was gone. The slaughter began. The Skitarii flooded in. They didn't care about the culture or the beauty of Wakanda. They saw the vibranium mounts. They began to dismantle the city while the people were still fighting. A Wakandan ship flew at a Titan. The Titan's Vulcan mega bolter spun up. It fired hundreds of rounds a second. The ship was shredded in midair. Black Panther sprinted across the field. His suit absorbed the kinetic energy of the bullets. He leapt onto the leg of a Warhound Titan. He used his claws to cut hydraulic lines. The Titan stumbled. Oil sprayed out like blood. T'Challa climbed higher. He was going for the cockpit. He was a king protecting his people. He reached the head. He tore open the hatch. Inside, the princeps was hardwired into the machine. He was more machine than man. He looked at T'Challa with cold optical sensors. The princeps didn't panic. He activated the internal defense system. Electrical charges surged through the hull. T'Challa's suit absorbed it, but the overload was too much. The suit shorted out. T'Challa was thrown off the Titan. He fell 50 feet and hit the ground hard. Okoye ran to him. She dragged him back. The Golden City was burning. The library was on fire. The history of Wakanda was turning to ash. The Mechanicus was not there to conquer. They were there to harvest. Giant drills tunneled into the great mound. They were stealing the heart of the nation. In the confusion, Bucky Barnes appeared. He had his gun. He was firing at the cyborgs. He saw Rocket and Thor land the damaged Benatar in the jungle nearby. The Guardians had come to Earth. They had nowhere else to go. Thor stumbled out. He saw the burning city. He saw the Titans. He fell to his knees. He had failed again. He had let the reality stone fall. Now Wakanda was falling. Doctor Strange's plan was unraveling. He was hiding in the mirror dimension with Stark and Parker, watching the world burn. Stark was frantic. He was building a new suit, using scraps he pulled from the mirror reality, trying to fuse magic and tech. He called it the Thorbuster, but he knew it needed to be an Emperor Buster. Strange looked at the future. The timelines were disappearing. There used to be 14 million outcomes. Now there were only 2. Submission or extinction. Strange realized the Emperor was not just a warlord. He was a dampener of possibilities. His presence solidified reality, making magic harder to use. The warp was leaking in, but it was the Emperor's order that dominated. Strange looked at Stark. He said they had to make a choice. They couldn't win a military victory. They had to strike at the leader. They had to go to the Imperial Palace in New York. They had to assassinate a god. Back on the flagship, the Emperor stood in his scriptorium. He held the reality stone. He placed it on the gauntlet. 4 stones. Power, space, mind, reality. The fabric of the universe felt thin to him. He could see the threads of fate. He looked at the prisoner, Gamora. She was in a psychic trance. The telepaths of the Astra Telepathica were peeling back the layers of her mind. They found the location. Vormir. The Emperor did not smile. He did not gloat. He turned to his Captain General, Trajan Valoris. He ordered the fleet to prepare. He would go to Vormir alone. The Soul Stone required a sacrifice. The law said you must lose that which you love. The Emperor felt a cold logic. He did not love in the way humans did. He loved humanity. He loved the abstract concept of the species. He wondered if the stone would accept a different kind of currency. Or perhaps he would simply force the stone to yield. He was the anathema to chaos. He did not play by the rules of cosmic rocks. But on Earth, the resistance was desperate. The fall of Wakanda broke the morale of the world. If the most advanced nation could not stand for an hour against the Titans, who could? The UN surrendered unconditionally. The flags of the nations were lowered. The Aquila was raised. The Emperor's face was on every screen. He was not asking for worship. He was demanding compliance. In the ruins of the Avengers compound, which was now a crater, a small light blinked. It was the quantum tunnel in the back of Louis's van. A rat crawled over the dashboard. It stepped on a button. The machine whirred to life. Scott Lang popped out of the quantum realm. He looked around. He saw the destruction. He saw the strange Gothic ships in the sky. He had been gone for 5 hours, but 5 years had passed in the outside world. No, it had only been days, but the world looked like it had aged a century. Scott didn't know about the Emperor. He didn't know about the Crusade. He just knew something was wrong. He grabbed his suit. He shrank down. He ran. He was the X Factor. The Imperium scanned for energy, for magic, for heat. They did not scan for a man the size of an ant. Scott Lang was the only person on Earth who was unaccounted for. High above, the Emperor's ship engaged its warp drive. He was leaving Earth to secure the final victory. He left behind a garrison of millions. He left the Primarch's gene seed to be cultivated. He left a world in chains. The catastrophe was complete. Freedom was dead. Order had arrived. And in the silence of the void, the Soul Stone waited, hungry for a tribute the Emperor might not be able to pay. The Bucephalus hung in the orbit of Vormir like a dagger suspended over a corpse. The planet was a desolate sphere of purple twilight and freezing winds. It was a graveyard of ambitions. The Emperor of mankind did not take a shuttle. He teleported directly to the surface. He was accompanied by a single squad of custodian wardens. Their black cloaks whipped in the wind. Their guardian spears hummed with power fields that disrupted the silence of the dead world. This was a tactical insertion. The Emperor had calculated the probability of the Soul Stone's location. He sensed the warp signature of the place. It was old. It was older than the Elder. It smelled of ancient cosmic laws that predated the chaos of the warp. He walked up the mountain path. The snow hissed where his boots touched it. He did not feel the cold. He was a furnace of psychic potential. He was the master of mankind, and he had come to claim his property. At the summit, the Red Skull waited. The former leader of Hydra floated in his wraith-like robes. He looked at the Golden Giant. Johann Schmidt had seen power. He had held the Tesseract. But this was different. This was not a man empowered by an artifact. This was a man who had conquered the artifacts of his own biology. Schmidt floated down. He spoke of the price. He spoke of the sacrifice. A soul for a soul. To take the stone, one must lose that which they love. The Emperor looked at the spectral guardian. He did not speak to it. He considered it a Xenos construct or a warp ghost. It was irrelevant. He looked at the precipice. He understood the ritual. It was a blood magic transaction, primitive but binding. The laws of this universe were rigid. Then, the second player arrived. A portal of blue energy tore open at the base of the summit. Thanos stepped through. He was battered. His armor was scorched from the battle on Nowhere. He limped, but his resolve was iron. He had no army. The Black Order was dead. He had come alone to do what must be done. He saw the Emperor standing at the edge. Thanos climbed. He did not run. He walked with the weight of destiny. He called out to the golden figure. He spoke of balance. He spoke of resources. He told the Emperor that his conquest was madness, that consuming the universe would only hasten its death. Thanos believed he was the surgeon. He believed the Emperor was the cancer. The Emperor turned. He looked down at the Titan. For the first time, the Emperor spoke a full sentence to the alien. He told Thanos that the universe did not need balance. It needed order. It needed a ruler who could hold back the dark. He called Thanos a child playing with a calculator. He said that resources were not the limit. The limit was the will to seize them. Thanos roared. He charged. He had the strength to crush moons. He jumped the final distance, his fist raised. The Emperor did not draw his sword. He simply raised his left hand, the one bearing the lightning claw and the 3 Infinity Stones. He activated the Power Stone. A beam of purple energy erupted from the gauntlet. It hit Thanos in mid-air. The Titan's armor disintegrated. His skin burned. But Thanos was a survivor of a dead world. He pushed against the beam. He screamed in agony, forcing his way forward inch by inch. He wanted to reach the Emperor. He wanted to strip the gauntlet from him. The Emperor was impressed by the alien's durability. It was comparable to an orc war boss or a high-tier bioform of the Tyranids. But it was not enough. The Emperor activated the Space Stone. He warped the distance between them. Thanos ran, but the ground stretched. He was running an infinite marathon in a single second. Then the Emperor used the Reality Stone. He turned the air around Thanos into solid adamantium. Thanos was encased in a block of silver metal, frozen in a scream. He was a statue of failure. The Emperor lowered his hand. He looked at the trapped Titan. He did not kill him yet. He needed to test the theory of the sacrifice. The Red Skull watched with impassive eyes. He repeated the rule, that which you love. The Emperor stood silent. He looked into the void. What did he love? He had killed his own sons when they turned against him. He had purged entire populations for the greater good. He had erased history. Did he love the Custodes? They were his companions, his creations. He respected them. He valued them. But love was a weakness he had excised long ago to fight the chaos gods. But there was one thing, deep in the architecture of his mind, buried under millennia of war, there was a dream, the dream of a shepherd, the dream that humanity could one day be free of him. He loved the idea of his own obsolescence. He loved the hope that one day man would not need the emperor. That was the core of his tragedy. He fought so that he could one day stop fighting. He realized the transaction. To gain the power to save humanity, he had to sacrifice the hope that they could ever be saved without him. He had to accept that he would be their tyrant forever. He had to kill the dream of the Golden Age. He had to commit to the eternal war. The emperor closed his eyes. In the psychic landscape of his mind, he saw a vision of a green field, a simple house, a time of peace. He saw himself as a man, not a god. He took that vision, he took that hope, and he crushed it. He felt a psychic scream tear through his soul. It was the death of his mercy. He opened his eyes. They were colder now. They were absolute. He turned to the frozen Thanos. He did not love Thanos, but the ritual required a soul. The emperor decided to force the definition. He would not sacrifice a person. He would sacrifice a concept, and he would use Thanos as the vessel for the energy release. He clenched the power stone again. He shattered the adamantium block. Thanos fell, gasping. The emperor grabbed the Titan by the throat. He lifted him over the edge. Thanos looked into the emperor's eyes. He saw no madness. He saw only a terrifying sanity. The emperor threw Thanos. Thanos fell into the mist. There was no sound of impact, just silence. The Red Skull hovered. He seemed confused. The ritual usually required love, but the Soul Stone was reacting to something else. It was reacting to the sheer domination of the Emperor's will. The Emperor was overwriting the rules of the stone with his own psychic reality. He was commanding the stone to accept the sacrifice of a Titan as a sufficient tribute to his own resolve. The sky swirled. An orange light pierced the clouds. The Emperor found himself waking up in a shallow pool of water. In his hand was the Soul Stone. He had cheated the test, or perhaps the stone had realized that to deny him was to be destroyed. He placed the orange gem on his gauntlet. 4 stones. Back on Earth, the strategic situation was deteriorating. The initial shock of the invasion had worn off, replaced by the grinding misery of occupation. The resistance had moved underground, literally. Scott Lang crawled through a ventilation shaft in the sublevels of Hive Secundus. He was the size of an ant. He carried a microdrive containing tactical schematics he had stolen from a servitor's dataport. Scott had seen things that made him vomit. He saw factories where the workers were chained to the assembly lines. He saw children being screened for psychic potential and dragged away in black ships if they showed any sign of witchcraft. He reached the safe house. It was an abandoned subway station in the Bronx, shielded by Dr. Strange's magic. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and fear. Scott enlarged himself. He was shaking. Steve Rogers sat at a folding table. He looked 20 years older. His beard was grey. He was cleaning his shield, but the paint was scratched off. Natasha Romanoff was looking at a map of the city. The map was covered in red markers. Every marker was an Imperial checkpoint or a heavy bolter nest. Tony Stark was in the corner. He was not wearing a suit. He was welding. He was working on a gauntlet. It wasn't the Infinity Gauntlet. It was something else. He was using scraps of Uru metal that Thor had salvaged from the wreckage of the Statesman before they crashed. Stark looked manic. He hadn't slept in days. He was muttering about machine spirits and omnissiah terms. he had picked up from hacking the Imperial network. He was trying to understand the enemy's superstition to exploit it. Scott threw the drive on the table. He told them what he found. The Imperium was building a spire, a psychic beacon. They called it the Astropathic Choir. It was located on top of the Empire State Building. If they finished it, they could call the rest of their crusade. Billions more ships. Thor sat on the tracks. He was fat, depressed, and drinking ethanol he had distilled from engine coolant. Rocket Raccoon was sitting on his shoulder, patting his head. Rocket looked at the group. He said the Guardians were gone. Quill and the others had tried to sabotage a supply ship and got captured. They were being held on the prison barge in orbit. Strange walked in from the shadows. He looked pale. Maintaining the shielding around the hideout was draining him. He told them the Emperor was gone. He felt the psychic weight lift from the planet. This was their window. The strategic chain reaction that the prompt demanded was about to begin. Strange explained the logic. The Imperium was a top-heavy hierarchy. Without the Emperor, the different branches, the Astartes, the Mechanicus, the Custodes, struggled to coordinate. They had rigid protocols. If the resistance could create enough chaos, the Imperial factions might pause to regroup or argue over jurisdiction. The plan was formed. It was not a head-on assault. It was a decapitation strike on the communication network. They had to destroy the Astropathic Choir. If they did, the fleet in orbit would be blind to the warp. They wouldn't be able to call for reinforcements. Rhodey, who was now wearing a makeshift suit built from Stark tech and scavenged Imperial scraps, pointed out the problem. The Empire State Building was guarded by the Imperial Fists, Space Marines who specialized in fortification. They had turned the skyscraper into a fortress. Stark stood up. He held up the device he was building. It was a virus, not a computer virus, but a logic virus. He had analyzed the binary chant of the Mechanicus. He found a contradiction in their dogma. If he could upload this into their local noosphere, he could cause the servitors and the automated turrets to suffer a logic breakdown. They would freeze. But someone had to get close enough to upload it. Parker raised his hand. He was bruised, his suit torn. He said he could do it. He was fast. He could swing up the spire before the targeting auspex locked on. Cap shook his head. It was suicide. But there was no other choice. The operation began at midnight. The weather was a blizzard of ash. The Imperium had burned the forests of New Jersey for fuel, and the ash fell on New York like black snow. War Machine and Thor launched the distraction. They attacked the supply depots in Queens. Thor summoned the lightning. It was the first time in weeks the sky lit up with something other than orbital bombardment. The lightning struck a parked transport ship. The fuel cells detonated. A mushroom cloud rose over the borough. The Imperial Fists reacted. Drop pods rained down on Queens. The yellow armored giants moved to engage the threat. They believed it was a full-scale uprising. They drew their forces away from Manhattan. The bait was taken. In the confusion, the strike team moved on the Empire State Building. Captain America, Black Widow, and Winter Soldier hit the ground entrance. They fought the PDF, Planetary Defense Force, human collaborators who had joined the Imperium to survive. These were NYPD officers and soldiers who now wore flak armor and carried laser guns. Steve fought them with tears in his eyes. He wasn't fighting aliens. He was fighting scared Americans who had broken under the fear. He knocked them out. He didn't kill them. But Bucky was less merciful. He used his vibranium arm to crush rifles and break bones. They breached the lobby. It was a slaughterhouse of Gothic architecture. Skulls were embedded in the walls. Spider-Man began his ascent. He crawled up the side of the building. The wind was howling. At the 80th floor, the automated turrets activated. Heavy bolters tracked his heat signature. Peter dodged. He was agile, but the volume of fire was mathematical. A shell clipped his shoulder. He spun, firing a web at the camera lens of the turret. The web froze instantly in the cold upper atmosphere. Inside the tower, Tony Stark and Scott Lang were infiltrating the server room on the 50th floor. They encountered a tech priest. The priest was a nightmare of mechatendrils and red robes. He spoke in static. He accused them of tech heresy. He lashed out with a power axe. Iron Man blocked the axe with his new shield. It was made of the same alloy as the Space Marine ships. Stark fired a repulsor blast, but he had tuned the frequency to disrupt the priest's cybernetics. The priest convulsed. Oil leaked from his Vox grill. Scott Lang shrank, ran up the priest's robe, and pulled a wire in his neck. The priest collapsed. Stark jacked into the console. He uploaded the logic virus. The effect was immediate. The defensive grid of the tower flickered. The turrets outside stopped firing. Spider-Man reached the top. He saw the astropaths. They were blind men and women, bound to chairs, screaming silently into the void. Their heads were shaved and wired together. It was a psychic battery. Peter hesitated. He had to destroy the array. That meant destroying the antenna, and the people wired to it. He was a hero. He didn't kill. But then the sky tore open. The distraction in Queens had worked too well. It hadn't just drawn the Space Marines. It had drawn the attention of the fleet. The Phalanx, the massive fortress monastery ship of the Imperial Fists, moved into low orbit over Manhattan. It didn't care about the spire. It saw a compromised asset. A bombardment cannon adjusted its angle. Peter screamed into his comms. They're targeting the building. Strange, watching from the sanctum, realized the cold calculus of the Astartes. If a position is overrun, deny it to the enemy. They were going to vaporize their own tower to stop the virus from spreading. Strange opened a portal. He shouted for Peter to jump. Peter looked at the astropaths. He couldn't save them. He jumped through the portal just as the macro shell hit the spire. The top 30 floors of the Empire State Building vanished in a flash of white light. The shockwave shattered every window in Manhattan. The astropathic choir was gone. The immediate threat of reinforcements was delayed, but the cost was the center of the city. The strategic chain reaction had begun. The destruction of the spire blinded the local fleet coordination. The ships in orbit started drifting slightly, their data tethers severed. On the ground, the servitors froze as Stark's virus propagated. For 1 hour the Imperium was paralyzed. In that hour the resistance struck everywhere. They raided armories, they freed prisoners, they stole food. It was a riot of hope. But hope is a dangerous thing in the Warhammer universe. The confusion of the fleet woke up something else. Deep in the cryovaults of the flagship, a dreadnought awoke. This was not a normal walker. This was an ancient, a warrior who had fought in the Great Crusade of the 30th millennium. Venerable brother Captain Tybalt of the Imperial Fists saw the data feed. He saw the chaos. He saw that the mortals were failing. He overrode the command codes. He ordered the deployment of the Terminators. Teleportation flares lit up Times Square. The first company arrived. They wore tactical dreadnought armor. They were walking tanks. They did not use cover. They did not run. They carried storm bolters and power fists. They began to march toward the Sanctum Sanctorum. They knew the source of the resistance was there. Strange felt them coming. The magic barriers were buckling under the sheer anti-psychic denial of the approaching force. The Terminators were equipped with teleport homers that anchored reality, weakening Strange's spells. And far away, in the void, the Emperor felt the disturbance. He had the Soul Stone. He felt the astropathic choir die. He felt the sting of the virus. He did not feel anger. He felt disappointment. He adjusted his course. He was coming back, but he wasn't coming back alone. He used the Space Stone to send a signal across the galaxy. He called the Mechanicus fleets from Mars. He called the Adeptus Crusade elements that were lost in the warp. He was escalating the conflict. Earth was no longer a compliance action. It was a war zone. On the Benatar, hidden in the jungle of Xandar, Rocket Raccoon saw the sensor reading spike. "Guys," he said, his voice trembling, "you know how there was one giant gold ship? Well, now there's 1,000 of them." The sky was filling with stars. But they weren't stars. They were the drive plumes of a sector battle fleet. The High Lords had panicked. They had authorized the deployment of the Exterminatus weaponry, not to destroy Earth yet, but to hold it hostage. The Emperor's voice returned to the global voxcasters. It was calmer than before. It was terrifyingly reasonable. "Citizens of Terra," he spoke, "you have chosen pain. You have rejected the light. Now you will know the night. The rationing is ended. The mercy is ended. The cull begins." The streetlights turned off across the planet. The power grids were cut by the orbiting ships. Earth was plunged into total darkness. The only light came from the fires of the burning cities and the red eyes of the Space Marines hunting in the dark. Steve Rogers stood in the subway tunnel. The lights died. He turned on a flashlight. The beam cut through the dust. He looked at Tony. "We blinded them," Steve said. "Yeah," Tony replied, looking at his unfinished gauntlet. "And now they're going to flail around and break everything." The strategic victory was won, but the consequence was a total escalation. The resistance had forced the Imperium to stop treating them like a pest and start treating them like a threat. And the Imperium had only one way of dealing with threats: absolute annihilation. In the shadows of the Dark City, a new sound began. It was a chittering, a scratching. The sewers were not empty. The Imperium had brought something else in their cargo holds, something to hunt the rebels in the tunnels, cybermastiffs and servo-automata. The hunt was on. This ended not with a cheer, but with the realization that they had kicked a sleeping dragon, and now the dragon was awake and breathing fire. The Emperor was returning with 4 stones, and he had lost his patience. The stage was set for the final catastrophe. The small choice to destroy the tower had led to the massive outcome of total war. The darkness over Earth was absolute. It was not merely the absence of light. It was a physical weight. The Emperor had ordered the deployment of void shields in low orbit, overlapping to form a black shroud that blocked the sun completely. The temperature plummeted. In the ruins of New York, the Hudson River froze solid within 48 hours. The ash from the burning of New Jersey settled on the ice, turning the world into a monochrome sketch of despair. This was the long night. It was a standard Imperial compliance tactic. A world that cannot see the sun will eventually worship the only light that remains. In the subway tunnels beneath Manhattan, the resistance was dying. It was not dying from bolt shells or chainswords. It was dying from hypothermia. The civilians who had fled underground were huddled in the maintenance shafts. Their breath misted in the air. There was no food. The rats had been eaten days ago. Now, the silence was broken only by the coughing of children and the distant, rhythmic thud of the Imperial enforcers marching on the surface. Steve Rogers walked through the camp. He carried a flashlight with failing batteries. He checked on the families. He saw a mother holding a child who had stopped shivering hours ago. Steve checked for a pulse. There was none. He closed the child's eyes. He stood up and walked away. His fists were clenched so tight that his knuckles were white. He was a super soldier. He could survive the cold, but he could not warm the others with his serum. He felt a failure so profound it tasted like bile. He reached the command hub. It was a jury-rigged room inside an old generator station. Tony Stark was there. He was shivering uncontrollably. The arc reactor in his chest was dim. He was diverting its power to keep the localized heating grid running for the medbay, but it wasn't enough. Natasha Romanoff sat wrapped in thermal blankets, sharpening a knife that she knew was useless against ceramite armor. Rocket Raccoon was curled up in a ball of fur, entering a hibernation state to survive. Tony looked at the generator. It was a massive industrial turbine. It was offline. If they turned it on, it could power the heaters for the entire tunnel network. It could save the freezing civilians. But it emitted a thermal signature that would light up the Auspex scanners of the fleet like a supernova. It was a choice between freezing to death quietly or risking fire from the sky. Steve looked at Tony. He didn't order him. He just asked how long the kids had left. Tony did the math. He said 3 hours. After that, the cold would shut down their organs. Steve looked at the generator. He looked at the shivering people. He made the choice. It was a moral choice. It was a hero's choice. In the Marvel universe, this choice would be rewarded. Bravery is usually met with a chance for victory. But this was not the Marvel universe anymore. This was a timeline governed by the cruel calculus of the 41st millennium. Tony engaged the magnetic couplings. He bypassed the safety limiters. He slammed the lever. The turbine roared to life. The lights in the tunnels flickered on. The heaters hummed. A wave of warmth washed over the refugees. They cried out in relief. Mothers hugged their children. For a moment, there was hope. High above, on the bridge of the flagship Bucephalus, a servitor monitored the thermal scans of the surface. A red rune blinked on the display. Heat spike detected in Sector 7G. Coordinates locked. The servitor did not have emotions. It did not feel pity. It transmitted the data to the gunnery deck. But the Captain General of the Custodes, Trajan Valoris, countermanded the order to bombard. He had a better idea. The Emperor sought the time stone. The heat spike was a marker. It was an invitation. Valoris did not send a legion. He did not send a tank. He authorized the deployment of an Eversaw assassin. The Eversaw is not a soldier. It is a biological weapon. It is a human who has been lobotomized, pumped full of combat drugs, and kept in cryostasis until the moment of kill. It does not feel fear. It does not feel pain. It only feels a chemical rage that burns until its heart explodes. A single drop pod was fired. It was small, stealth-coated. It slammed into the frozen pavement of 8th Avenue. It punched through the street. It punched through the sub-basement. It landed in the subway tunnel, 300 meters from the resistance base. The pod hissed. Steam vented. The door blew off. The assassin emerged. He wore a skull mask. His body was a map of stimulant injectors and synthetic muscle. He carried a neurotic claw and an executioner pistol. He screamed. It was not a battle cry. It was the sound of a chemically induced psychosis. He began to run. He moved faster than a car. He ran along the walls. He ran along the ceiling. The perimeter guards were the first to die. They were former SHIELD agents. They heard the scream. They raised their rifles. The assassin hit them like a frag grenade. He tore the first man in half with the claw. He shot the second man in the head before the body of the first man hit the ground. He didn't stop. He was a blur of violence. Inside the command hub, the alarms didn't just ring. They shrieked. Friday, Tony's AI identified the threat. She couldn't classify it. Biological moving at speeds inconsistent with human physiology. Tony disconnected from the generator. He summoned his suit. The nanotech formed around him, but it was sluggish in the cold. Steve grabbed his shield. Bucky grabbed his rifle. They ran to the blast doors. They heard the screaming getting closer. It was a wet, tearing sound. The blast doors shook. Something was hitting them from the other side. Not with a battering ram, but with pure kinetic frenzy. The door buckled. Then it exploded inward. The assassin leaped into the room. He landed on a table. He looked at them with lenses that glowed red. He saw Captain America. The assassin's programming identified a threat level. Alpha. He injected a cocktail of frenzy and onslaught into his own veins. His muscles swelled. Steve threw his shield. It was a perfect throw. It hit the assassin in the chest. The assassin didn't even flinch. He caught the shield on the rebound, something no one had ever done, and threw it back with double the force. The shield hit Steve and knocked him through a concrete wall. Bucky opened fire. The bullets hit the assassin's synth skin. They flattened and fell off. The assassin lunged. He tackled Bucky. The vibranium arm clashed with the neurotic claw. Sparks flew. The assassin was stronger. The drugs gave him the strength of a tank in the body of a man. He drove the claw into Bucky's shoulder. Bucky screamed. Tony fired his unibeam. The blast hit the assassin and threw him off Bucky. The assassin hit the ceiling, flipped, and landed on his feet. He looked at Iron Man. He raised his executioner pistol. It fired needle rounds filled with neurotoxins. The needles hit Tony's armor. They couldn't penetrate the gold titanium alloy, but the explosive tips detonated, blinding Tony's senses. Then Dr. Strange stepped forward. He stood in the doorway of the inner sanctum. He saw the monster. He saw his friends dying. He realized this was the distraction. The assassin was just the hound. The hunter was coming. Strange raised the eye of Agamotto. He opened the time stone. Green light flooded the tunnel. He began to turn the dial. He wanted to reverse time. He wanted to undo the decision to turn on the generator. He wanted to save the child but keep the dark. It was a desperate gamble. The green rings of time magic expanded. The assassin froze in midair. The bullets flew backward into Bucky's gun. The blood flowed back into Bucky's shoulder. Steve flew back through the wall and caught his shield. The generator wound down. The lights went out. Strange was doing it. He was rewriting the last 10 minutes. He pushed further. He saw the timeline bending. He felt the cold return. He was succeeding. Then a hand grabbed his wrist. It was not a physical hand. It was a golden, psychic construct. Strange looked up. The ceiling of the tunnel was dissolving. The reality of the subway station was peeling away like burnt paper. Standing in a void of golden light, stepping through the fabric of the time loop itself, was the Emperor. The Emperor had anticipated this. He possessed the Space Stone, which allowed him to be everywhere, and the Reality Stone, which allowed him to stabilize the environment against paradoxes. But more importantly, he was a creature of the warp. The warp is timeless. Time is a linear concept that does not apply to the immaterium. When Strange activated the stone, he entered a realm where the Emperor was the apex predator. The Emperor looked at Strange. There was no anger, only disappointment. He spoke into Strange's mind. He told him that time was not a toy. It was a river, and the Emperor was the dam. The Emperor squeezed. Strange's magical shields shattered like glass. The cloak of levitation tried to pull Strange away, but the Emperor's psychic gravity pinned it to the floor. The Emperor reached out with his other hand. He took the eye of Agamotto. Strange screamed. It was the scream of a sorcerer losing his connection to the universe. The Emperor crushed the casing of the amulet. He plucked the green time stone from the debris. He held it up. The green light reflected in his cold eyes. He placed it on the gauntlet. 5 stones. Power, space, reality, soul, time. The time loop collapsed. Reality snapped back to the present. The assassin unfroze. He finished his lunge and ripped Bucky's metal arm clean off his body. Bucky fell, bleeding out. Steve scrambled to his feet, dazed. He saw the Emperor standing in the middle of the room. The sheer majesty of the figure was paralyzing. This was not Thanos. This was a being that radiated the authority of history. Tony Stark looked at the Emperor. He looked at his broken friends. He looked at the civilians cowering in the back. He realized the calculation was finished. Probability of survival, 0. But Stark was stubborn. He activated the protocol he had been saving. The God-Killer protocol. He didn't fire a weapon. He activated a localized EMP burst mixed with the logic virus he had used on the tower. It was a suicide move. It would fry his own suit, but it might disrupt the Emperor's armor systems for a split second. The burst went off. The lights in the tunnel exploded. The assassin twitched and collapsed, his cybernetics fried. Iron Man's suit seized up and went dead. Stark was trapped in his own metal coffin. The Emperor stood in the darkness. His armor glowed with its own internal light. The EMP had done nothing to him. His armor was not merely technological. It was powered by his own psychic will. The machine spirit of his war gear was too ancient, too loyal to be corrupted by a primitive scrap code. The Emperor stepped over the twitching body of the assassin. He looked at Stark. He raised his sword. The flaming blade illuminated the fear in Tony's eyes behind the faceplate. The Emperor did not strike. He simply pointed to the exit. "Run," the Emperor said. "Tell the others, the crusade is inevitable." He didn't kill them. He didn't need to. He had the time stone. He had broken their stronghold. He wanted them to flee. He wanted them to gather in one last place so he could end it all with a single stroke. He was efficient. Chasing rats through tunnels was a waste of time. He would let the rats find a hole, and then he would pour the poison in. The Emperor teleported away. The vacuum of his departure knocked Steve to the ground. Silence returned to the tunnel. But it was different now. It was the silence of defeat. Bucky was unconscious. Natasha was bandaging his stump. Strange was catatonic, staring at his empty chest. The time stone was gone. The greatest weapon they had was in the hands of the enemy. The small choice to turn on the heater had led to the loss of the timeline itself. They had to leave. The heat signature was still there. The fleet would bombard the location any minute to clean up the mess. Steve picked up Bucky. Rhodey, whose suit was shielded and survived the EMP, grabbed Tony's frozen suit and engaged the emergency flight servos to drag him out. They fled into the deeper tunnels, heading for the submarine docks in the harbor. They had a contingency, a stealth ship provided by the Wakandan refugees. It was their only way off the island. As they ran, the bombardment began. The Bucephalus opened fire with its macro cannons. The earth shook. The ceiling of the subway collapsed behind them. The fire chased them through the dark. They could hear the screams of the civilians they had tried to warm. The generated heat had bought them an hour of comfort, and the price was their lives. They reached the harbor. The water was black and choked with ice. The Wakandan stealth ship, the Royal Talon, surfaced. Shuri was piloting. She looked at the battered group. She didn't ask what happened. She saw the empty eye of Agamotto. She knew. They boarded the ship. It dived. They slipped past the Imperial blockade scanners, using the noise of the bombardment as cover. They headed for the only place left. The ruins of the Avengers compound upstate were gone. The cities were occupied. They headed for space. Rocket Raccoon had a plan. A bad one. He said the Benatar was impounded on the prison barge, but he had a tracker on it. If they could get to the barge, steal their ship, They could jump to the one place the Emperor's psychic vision might be clouded. The Eye of Terror, or the Marvel equivalent, the Quantum Realm, or perhaps the Negative Zone. No, they needed a fortress. Rocket suggested Nidavellir, the Forge of the Dwarves. Atri might still be alive. If they could forge a weapon to hold the last stone, the Mind Stone. No, the Emperor had the Mind Stone. The only stone left was the Mind Stone. No, the Emperor took mind from vision. He took power from Xandar, space from Loki, reality from the Collector, soul from Vormir, time from Strange. Rocket stopped. He counted on his claws. Xandar, Loki, nowhere, Vormir, Strange, vision. The color drained from Rocket's face. He looked at Thor. He has them all. Rocket whispered. He isn't missing any. He has all 6. The bridge of the ship went silent. If the Emperor had all 6 stones, why hadn't he snapped? Why were they still alive? Nebula stepped forward. She had been hacking the Imperial data stream. She projected a schematic onto the main display. It showed the ruins of New York. It showed a massive psychic conduit being built atop the Empire State Building. He does not want to destroy the universe, Nebula said, her voice cold. He wants to control it. He is building a machine to focus the energy, a golden throne. The realization hit them harder than a physical blow. The Emperor was not waiting for a stone. He was waiting for the cement to dry. He was preparing a ritual that would enslave reality itself. The massive outcome was not just the loss of the time stone. It was the completion of the collection. The Emperor had won the fetch quest. Now he entered the endgame. The Resistance is fleeing on the stealth ship. They are heading to the edge of the system. They are broken. Tony Stark breaks out of his frozen suit. He is weeping. He tells them it's over. But Thor, who has been silent, speaks up. He looks at his new axe, Stormbreaker. He says the Emperor is a being of the warp. The stones control the material universe, but the Emperor's soul is his weakness. Thor says there is one chance, not a snap, but a duel. But they have no leverage. Then Nebula speaks. She has been hacking the Imperial data stream during the flight. She found a file, a schematic. The Emperor is building something in the ruins of New York, a throne. He hasn't used the stones yet. He is waiting for the alignment. They have one last shot, a suicide run at the throne room. It ends with the Emperor sitting on a makeshift golden throne atop the ruins of the Empire State Building. The 6 stones are floating around him, not on a gauntlet, but integrated into the machinery of the throne. He is meditating. The psychic pressure on Earth is increasing. People are falling to their knees, bleeding from their ears, chanting in High Gothic without knowing why. The compliance is becoming genetic. The massive outcome of the small choice to turn on the heater was the acceleration of the timeline. The Emperor has the time stone now. He doesn't have to wait. He can accelerate the construction. The end of the world is not coming in a year. It is coming in an hour. The Resistance ship breaks orbit. They look back at Earth. It is glowing with a golden, sick light. The atmosphere is ionizing. Steve Rogers touches the comms. Is there anyone left? Static. Then a voice. It is faint. It is coming from the dark side of the moon. This is Carol Danvers. I'm seeing the energy spikes. I'm coming in hot. Captain Marvel has arrived. But against 6 stones and the Emperor of mankind, even she might be nothing more than a moth flying into a star. The stage is set. The unavoidable offer. The Emperor will not just try to kill them. He will offer them a place in his new universe. He will offer them order, and they will have to choose between a safe dictatorship or a dangerous freedom. This ends with the absolute victory of the antagonist. The heroes have lost every battle. They have lost every stone. They have lost their base. They have lost their hope. all they have left is one ship, one angry god, one super soldier, and a captain glowing with binary power. And the Emperor waits on his throne, the master of reality. The silence of the void is heavy. The stars seem to be holding their breath. The only sound is the hum of the stones, singing a song of total, terrifying perfection. The timeline is calcifying. The chaotic variables of freedom are being overwritten. The age of the Imperium is here. The psychic scream of the Golden Throne tore through the atmosphere of terror. It was not a sound that could be recorded by microphones. It was a pressure in the soul. In the ruins of New York, now the sanctum of the imperial truth, the laws of physics were being rewritten. Gravity was no longer a constant. It was a suggestion enforced by the will of the master of mankind. The sky above Manhattan was a swirling vortex of gold and crimson clouds, a manufactured nebula that blocked the gaze of the stars. The city itself had been transformed in a matter of days. The Empire State Building was gone, encased in a mountain of plasteel, adamantium, and psycho-reactive crystal. It was now the spire of the Astronomicon, a beacon not for navigation but for domination. At the summit of this spire sat the Emperor. He was not wearing his helmet. His face was ancient, handsome, and terrifyingly devoid of doubt. He sat upon the golden throne, a device of such complexity that looking at it caused headaches in the unaugmented. The 6 Infinity Stones were not on his hand. They were integrated into the mechanisms of the throne. They floated in a magnetic suspension field around his head, spinning in a perfect mathematical rhythm. The Power Stone fed the reactor. The Space Stone folded the dimensions of the room. The Reality Stone hardened the materials. The Time Stone synchronized the cogitators. The Soul Stone filtered the psychic feedback. The Mind Stone acted as the interface between the Emperor's brain and the machine. He was rewriting the biocode of humanity. He was not snapping his fingers to kill. He was broadcasting a signal that suppressed the chemical reactions in the human brain, responsible for rebellion, chaotic emotion, and fear. He was curing the species of its volatility. To him, this was the ultimate mercy. No more war, no more disagreement, only the unity of the single will. The Pax Imperialis was descending like a suffocating blanket. In the high orbit of Mars, the Resistance fleet gathered. It was a pathetic assembly. The Wakandan stealth ship, the Royal Talon, the Benatar stolen back from the prison barge by a lucky suicide run. And floating in the void between them, glowing with the energy of a binary star, was Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel. She had returned from the Kree Empire. She had seen the worlds burned by the Imperial Crusade on its way to Earth. She had seen the husk of Xandar. She was angry. Her hair was a flame of cosmic energy. Her eyes were white hot. Steve Rogers spoke over the comms. His voice was tired. He was the last moral compass in a galaxy that had smashed the magnetic north. He laid out the plan. It was not a strategy. It was her execution. They could not fight the fleets. They could not fight the legions. They had to strike the head. They had to destroy the throne. If they broke the connection between the Emperor and the stones, the feedback might kill him, or at least distract him long enough for Thor to use Stormbreaker. It was a plan built on hope, and hope was a resource the Imperium had already rationed to zero. The attack began at dawn, though there was no sun to see. Captain Marvel led the charge. She did not fly like a pilot. She flew like a missile. She hit the void shields of the Imperial blockade at light speed. The impact was visible from the surface. A ripple of violet fire washed over the sky. The sheer kinetic energy shattered the shield generators of 3 frigates. The Royal Talon and the Benatar slipped through the hole in the net. The descent was a nightmare. The sky was filled with interceptors. Storm Talon gunships and Xiphon fighters swarmed like angry hornets. Rocket Raccoon was screaming at the controls of the Benatar. He spun the ship, firing thrusters, dodging macro shells the size of cars. Shuri piloted the Talon with cold precision, her hands moving over the holographic interface. They were taking hits. Armor plates were peeling off. The heat of re-entry was turning the hulls cherry red. Carol Danvers was the vanguard. She flew ahead of the ships, blasting a path through the enemy fighters. She was a living weapon. She punched through the cockpit of a Thunderhawk transporter. She incinerated a squad of Raptor jetpack troops. She was unstoppable, or so she thought. On the ground, the Emperor opened his eyes. He felt the intruder. He felt the energy signature of the Tesseract in her blood. She was a child of the Space Stone. He respected the power, but he despised the lack of discipline. He sent a mental command to the librarians of the Grey Knights, the demon hunters he had kept in reserve. As Carol dove towards the spire, a psychic bolt hit her. It wasn't a laser. It was a telepathic lance. It struck her mind, not her body. She screamed. Memories of her past, her failures, her identity were scrambled. She faltered. Her flight path wavered. A battery of Hydra flak tanks opened fire. The air was filled with shrapnel. Carol was knocked out of the sky. She crashed into the streets of Midtown, creating a crater that swallowed a city block. The ships kept going. They couldn't stop for her. They reached the spire. The anti-air fire was so thick, it looked like a solid wall of lead and light. The Benatar lost a wing. Rocket cursed and ejected the cockpit module. The Talon took a direct hit to the engines. It spiraled down. Both ships crashed onto the landing deck of the spire, skidding across the adamantium plating, sparks showering like fireworks. The hatches blew open. The Avengers stumbled out. They were broken, bleeding, and desperate. Captain America held his shield, but his arm was trembling. Thor gripped Stormbreaker, his electric eye glowing with a berserker rage. Tony Stark, in a suit made of scraps and salvaged Imperial tech, looked like a walking junkyard. Natasha Romanoff, Bruce Banner in the Hulkbuster armor, and War Machine formed the rear. They were greeted by silence. The wind howled around the spire. The golden clouds swirled above. There were no guards, no Custodes, no Space Marines. The path to the throne was open. It was an invitation. They walked up the steps. The scale of the architecture was designed to make them feel small. Statues of imperial saints looked down on them with weeping eyes. They reached the sanctum. The doors were 50 feet high. They swung open with a groan of heavy gears. The throne room was a cavern of light. The air smelled of ozone and incense. In the center, atop the mountain of machinery, sat the Emperor. He looked down at them. The 6 stones spun around him. The hum of the machine was a song that vibrated in their teeth. Tony Stark stepped forward. He aimed his repulsors, but he didn't fire. His sensors were going haywire. The energy readings from the throne were off the charts. It wasn't just radiation. It was reality distortion. The Emperor was rewriting the local laws of physics to prevent combustion. Tony's weapons wouldn't fire. The chemical propellant in the bullets wouldn't ignite. The Emperor spoke. His voice did not come from his mouth. It came from the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. He welcomed them. He called them the last variable. He did not mock them. He spoke with the weariness of a man who has been working for 40,000 years. He asked them why they fought. Steve Rogers answered. He shouted that they fought for freedom, for the right to choose. The Emperor sighed. It was a sound like a tectonic plate shifting. He stood up from the throne. The stones continued to spin, tethered to him by psychic tendrils. He walked down the steps. He was 12 feet tall, a golden god of war. He told Steve that freedom was a lie. He showed them a vision. The reality stone projected a hologram into the room. It showed the history of humanity in the 41st millennium. It showed the horrors of the warp. It showed worlds consumed by demons because one psyker had a moment of freedom and opened a portal to hell. It showed the dark gods, Nurgle, Khorne, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, feasting on the emotions of free sentient beings. The Emperor explained that the Marvel Universe was naive. They played with forces they did not understand. Magic, time travel, Infinity Stones. These were beacons to the predators of the Immaterium. He explained that he had come to this timeline not to conquer, but to close the door, to seal this reality off from the warp before the Chaos Gods found it. He offered them a choice. This was the unavoidable offer. He looked at Tony Stark. He offered him the position of Fabricator General. He offered him the knowledge of the Dark Age of technology. He offered him the chance to build a world where hunger and disease were engineered out of existence. All he had to do was accept the dogmatic restrictions of the cult Mechanicus. No AI, no innovation without sanction, safety through stagnation. He looked at Thor. He offered him a place in the Legio Custodes. He saw a warrior who had lost everything. He offered him purpose. He offered him a brotherhood that would never die, never fail, never betray. He offered him the eternal duty of the Watcher. He looked at Steve Rogers. He offered him retirement. He offered to use the Reality Stone to create a pocket dimension, a perfect replica of the 1940s, a world where the war ended, where he got the dance, where he lived a happy life, a heaven built just for him. All he had to do was lay down his shield and submit. It was tempting. The psychic weight of the Soul Stone pushed the desire into their minds. Tony saw the peace he could build. Thor saw the honor. Steve saw Peggy. They hesitated. The silence stretched. Then Captain Marvel crashed through the ceiling. She had recovered. She was binary. She was glowing so bright she hurt to look at. She didn't listen to the speech. She didn't care about the philosophy. She slammed into the Emperor with the force of a nuclear bomb. The impact shook the spire. The Emperor was thrown back against the throne. The stones flickered. The concentration was broken. Now, Thor screamed. The battle for the fate of the timeline began. It was not a fight of finesse. It was a brawl of gods. Thor leaped, summoning lightning that shouldn't have existed in the dampened reality. He smashed Stormbreaker against the Emperor's sword. The clash of Uru and psychic fire created a shockwave that blew the glass out of the windows. Hulkbuster charged. Bruce Banner was screaming. He grabbed the Emperor's leg. The Emperor looked down. He used the Power Stone. He kicked Banner. The armor shattered. Banner was thrown across the room, his bones broken. War Machine and Natasha fired everything they had. The bullets fell harmlessly against the Emperor's auramite armor. The Emperor waved his hand. The Space Stone warped the distance. War Machine was suddenly 5 miles away, falling through the sky outside. Natasha was teleported into a cell in the dungeon. They were removed from the board. It was down to the Trinity, Cap, Iron Man, Thor, and the interloper, Captain Marvel. Carol Danvers was going toe-to-toe with the master of mankind. She blasted him with photon beams. He absorbed them with his left hand and redirected them with his right. He was faster than her. He was more skilled. He had fought beings made of pure star stuff before. He used the Mind Stone to predict her attacks. He ducked under a punch and drove his elbow into her chest. She gasped. He grabbed her by the throat. He looked into her eyes. He used the Soul Stone. He attacked her spirit. He showed her the futility of her struggle. He drained her will. Her binary form flickered and died. He threw her aside like a broken doll. Tony Stark saw his chance. The Emperor was distracted. Tony flew at the throne. He wasn't attacking the Emperor. He was attacking the stones. He had a device, a disruptor he had built in the cave of the subway. If he could jam the magnetic field, maybe the stones would scatter. The Emperor saw him. He didn't turn. He simply used the time stone. He reversed time by 10 seconds. Tony was back at the starting position. The Emperor did it again, and again. Tony was trapped in a loop of failure. Steve Rogers stood alone. He looked at the Emperor. The Golden Giant was barely winded. The heroes were scattered. The plan had failed. Steve tightened the strap of his shield. He knew he couldn't win, but he could stand. "I can do this all day," Steve whispered. The Emperor looked at the super soldier. He felt a flicker of respect. This was the human spirit he wanted to save. The stubbornness, the refusal to break. It was a tragedy that it was directed against him. The Emperor raised his sword. The blade wreathed in fire. He walked towards Steve. He was going to end it. But then the throne malfunctioned. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't an attack. It was the stones themselves. They were resisting. The infinity stones of this universe were semi-sentient. They desired a certain flow. They desired balance. The Emperor was forcing them into a static order. They were fighting back. The power stone flared. The reality stone rippled. The feedback loop hit the Emperor. He stumbled. He clutched his head. The psychic backlash was immense. For a moment, his control slipped. Thor saw it. He was bleeding, his eyes swollen shut. He saw the opening. He didn't throw the axe at the Emperor. He threw it at the mechanism of the throne. Stormbreaker spun through the air. It hit the suspension field generator. The machine sparked and exploded. The magnetic field collapsed. The 6 stones fell. They clattered onto the floor of the sanctum. The Emperor roared. It was a sound of pure frustration. He dove for the stones. Tony Stark broke free of the time loop. He dove too. Steve Rogers dove. Captain Marvel scrambled across the floor. It was a scramble for the ultimate power. The Emperor was closest. He grabbed the Power Stone. He grabbed the Space Stone. But Captain Marvel grabbed the Reality Stone. Tony grabbed the Time Stone. Thor grabbed the Soul Stone. Steve grabbed the Mind Stone. They stood up, holding the gems. The power surged through them. They were burning up. Normal humans would die instantly, but they were holding on by sheer will. The Emperor stood opposite them. He had 2 stones. They had 4. "You cannot wield them," the Emperor warned. "They will consume you." "Better us than you," Tony gritted out. The Emperor did not panic. He analyzed the tactical situation. He had the Power Stone. He could destroy the planet instantly, but that would destroy his prize. He had the Space Stone. He could teleport the stones to him. But the others were holding them with such intense will that their own biofields were interfering with the warp signature. He had to negotiate. "Listen to me," the Emperor said, his voice dropping to a human register. "If you use those stones to fight me, you will tear this reality apart. The warp is watching. If you unleash that much energy, you will light a beacon that will bring the Chaos Gods here. You think I am a tyrant. I am the only wall between you and hell." He pointed at the sky. "Look." Through the shattered ceiling, the golden clouds were thinning, but behind them, the fabric of space was tearing. Purple and green rifts were opening. Eyes were looking through. Tentacles were probing. The battle had weakened the barrier between dimensions. The Chaos Gods had noticed the disturbance. "They are coming," the Emperor said. "Give me the stones. Let me finish the work. I can seal the breach. I can make this world safe. If you fight me, you damn your species to eternal torment." Steve Rogers looked at the rift. He felt the cold dread of the warp. He looked at the Emperor. He realized the tyrant was telling the truth. The Emperor wasn't lying. He was just brutal. "We don't trade lives," Steve said. "And we don't trade freedom for safety." "Then you choose death," the Emperor said. He raised the Power Stone. He was going to wipe them out. Consequences be damned. But Tony Stark looked at Doctor Strange's Time Stone in his hand. He saw the future Strange had seen. The one way. "Steve," Tony said. "Carol, Thor, together." They understood. They didn't try to snap. They didn't try to wish the Emperor away. That was too complex. They did the one thing the stones wanted to do. They touched them together. They brought the mind, soul, time, and reality stones into contact. The resonance created a feedback loop of infinite energy. They weren't aiming at the Emperor. They were aiming at the stones themselves. They were going to destroy the stones. "No!" the Emperor screamed. He knew what would happen. If the stones were destroyed, the fundamental aspects of the universe would unravel. He charged. He used the space stone to close the gap instantly. He reached out to stop them. He was too late. The four stones touched. A white light, brighter than the birth of the universe, expanded from the center of the room. It engulfed the Avengers. It engulfed the Emperor. It engulfed the spire. The light did not destroy the city. It didn't destroy the planet. It was a wave of pure conceptual erasure. It washed over the globe. When the light faded, the throne room was empty. The Avengers were gone. Their bodies had been atomized. Their souls merged into the ether. They had made the ultimate sacrifice. They had destroyed the stones to stop the tyrant. But the Emperor remained. He was kneeling in the center of the scorch mark. His armor was blackened. His cape was burned away. He was holding the Power Stone and the Space Stone. He had survived. His psychic might was so great that he had anchored himself in reality, while the others were washed away. He looked at his empty hand. The other four stones were gone, reduced to atoms. The circuit was broken. He could not rewrite reality. He could not control time. He could not manipulate souls. He could not dominate minds. He had won the battle, but he had lost the war. He stood up. He walked to the edge of the ruined spire. He looked out over the city. The golden clouds were fading. The rifts in the sky were sealing up, the energy surge having cauterized the wound in reality. The resistance was gone. The heroes were dead. Earth was his. But it was a hollow victory. Without the full set of stones, he could not cure humanity. He could not seal the webway permanently. He was trapped here, in a new galaxy, with only 2 stones and a broken throne. He looked at the fleet in the sky. The ships were still there. The legions were still there. He there activated his Vox bead. "This is the Emperor," he said. His voice was cold, devoid of the passion he had shown earlier. "The rebellion is ended. The compliance continues. Rebuild the spire. We will do this the old way." He turned back to the ruined machinery. He would not use magic. He would use industry. He would use war. He would conquer this galaxy planet by planet, system by system. It would take 10,000 years. It would cost 1 trillion lives. But he would bring order. The screen fades to black, not on a scene of triumph, but on the image of the Emperor sitting on the steps of the broken throne, holding 2 useless rocks, staring into the eternity of a task that can never be finished. The ultimate villain had won, but the victory was a curse. He was now the eternal caretaker of a broken graveyard. The camera pulls back, leaving the spire, leaving Earth, leaving the solar system. It drifts into the void. Archive log 994.m42. Segmentum solar. Planetary designation Terra Secundus. The recording begins with the hum of a ventilation fan. that has not been turned off in 4,000 years. The air in the scriptorium of the imperial palace is recycled, tasting of stale incense and old paper. A lone scribe sits at a desk made of iron. His skin is grey from a lack of sunlight. He's writing the history of the pacification. He does not write with passion. He writes because it is his quota. It has been 3 millennia since the Day of Ash, the event the local primitives once called the Endgame. The history books in the Schola Progenium teach that the arch-heretics, the ones known as the Avengers, attempted to destroy the universe in a fit of chaotic madness. They teach that the God Emperor, in his infinite mercy, slew them to preserve the sanctity of the human form. The names Stark, Rogers, and Odinson are cursed. They are synonyms for arrogance, disorder, and the failure of the biological mind to accept the necessity of control. The earth that spins outside the scribe's window is no longer a blue marble. It is a fortress of grey steel and brown smog. The oceans were drained centuries ago to cool the fusion reactors of the planetary shield generator. The continents are covered in hive cities that stretch miles into the atmosphere. New York is known as Hive Primus. Its spires pierce the cloud layer, housing the nobility and the priesthood. The base of the hive, the undersump, is where billions live in permanent darkness, recycling water from the waste of those above. They work 18-hour shifts manufacturing bolter shells for the eternal crusade. They do not know what a tree looks like. They do not know what the Avengers fought for. They only know the Emperor protects. The Emperor sits upon the golden throne in the heart of the spire. He is not the golden warrior who walked the fields of Wakanda. Time has taken its toll, even on the perpetual. He is a skeletal figure, fused to the machinery of the throne. The 2 remaining Infinity Stones, power and space, are embedded in his eye sockets. They glow with a baleful light. He uses the Space Stone to micromanage the logistics of a galaxy-spanning empire, moving fleets instantly across the void, without the need for dangerous warp travel. He uses the Power Stone to enforce his will, capable of cracking a rebellious planet from across the sector with a mere thought. But without the Time Stone, his body decays. Without the Reality Stone, the genetic flaws of humanity fester. Without the Soul Stone, the Golden Throne requires a different fuel. The black ships arrive daily at the spaceports of Terra Secundus. They carry the tithe. Thousands of psychically active individuals, mutants, and political dissidents are offloaded in chains. They are marched into the bowels of the spire. They are never seen again. Their life force is stripped away to power the psychic beacon that keeps the Emperor alive and the galaxy ordered. It is a furnace of souls burning bright to keep the darkness at bay. The alien empires are gone. The Kree were systematically exterminated in the 38th millennium during the Halos Crusade. The Skrulls were hunted to extinction by the Inquisition, their shape-shifting abilities useless against the genetic scanners of the Astartes. The Guardians of the Galaxy are a myth, a cautionary fairy tale about Xenos lovers who were eaten by the monsters of the dark. The galaxy is human. It is pure. It is silent. There is peace. There is no war between nations, for there are no nations. There is no crime, for the servitors monitor every street corner. There is no hunger, for the corpse starch rations are distributed by weight to every citizen. It is the peace of the grave. The grand ambition of the Emperor has been achieved. He has saved humanity from chaos. He has saved them from themselves. But in doing so, he has lobotomized the species. There is no art. There is no invention. There is only the repetition of the dogma. The scribe finishes his page. He dusts it with sand to dry the ink. He places it in a pneumatic tube. It is filed away in an archive that stretches for kilometers, filled with billions of pages that no one will ever read. The scribe stands up. He bows to the Aquila on the wall. He walks to his sleeping pod. He does not dream. Dreaming is a symptom of a wandering mind, and a wandering mind is a gateway to heresy. Outside, in the vacuum of the high-orbit dockyards, a massive new battleship is being christened. It is the flagship of the 45th Expeditionary Fleet. It is named the Compliance. Its hull is painted black. On its prow is a golden skull. It prepares to launch into the unknown regions of the intergalactic void, seeking the last remnants of free thought to extinguish. The cycle continues. The war is over, but the crushing weight of victory will last forever. The scribe's log ends. The fan continues to hum. The night is absolute.